Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. This is the last in a series of webinars we've been running over the past few weeks on the topic of electric vehicle charging. This afternoon's session is on maintenance and future-proofing of the network, and I'm pleased to say that, as ever, we're joined by a panel of experts with experience in various aspects of EV charging over the past few months and years that they'll be able to share with you today. My name's Matt Croucher. I'm the EV Services Director at Liberty Charge. I've been working in the EV sector for some 13 years now. I think without further ado, I'd like to invite our panelists into the room. So we've got Daniel Gosbee from Waltham Forest. We've got Peter McDonald from Croydon, Richard Spry-Shute from Liberty Charge, and Peter Robertson from Northamptonshire Council. And if I could just ask each of you to begin with, if we can run around and ask each of you to just give a short introduction to yourself and maybe just explain to the audience what your experience has been to date of EV charging, where you came into this sector from, and we'll then move on to the discussion of today's topic. Peter, if you wouldn't mind going first.
This is the Peter from Croydon.
Sorry, yes, I should clarify. Peter from Croydon.
Hi, so I'm in the strategic transport in Croydon, which is an outer London borough, stretching from Crystal Palace to Coulsdon and almost to the M25. We serve terraces of back-to-back housing through the suburbs and fields. We've got about 100 commercial charging bays in the borough and over 300 council ones. Installed our first charging points over a decade ago in the run-up to the London Olympics. Numbers have grown slowly since then. We've got quite a selection from lamp column bollards from 2 providers, a dozen rapids with Transport for London on their red routes, a couple of dozen from Source London, which are 7 and 22 kilowatts, 1 or 2 others, and then 100 chargers serving 200 bays with Liberty Charge. We've got a few in our car parks. They've worked less well, but there's quite a bit to learn in terms of maintenance and servicing, so I'll be pleased to be able to contribute some more as the webinar goes on. Brilliant.
Thanks, Peter. Daniel?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Daniel Gosbee, and I'm the Low Emission Transport Officer at Waltham Forest Council. I've been involved in the EV sector since 2018, and we've installed over 400 charging sockets in Waltham Forest, and that's a mixture of charging devices. So we've got 236 lamp column charging points, 62 7 kilowatt fast charging points, 112 22 kilowatt charging points at Liberty Charge, and we've got a handful of rapid charging points which make up the rest. And we're currently working with Liberty Charge right now with shovels hitting the ground on our next batch of 94 charging sockets, which is fantastic to see. We've had an interesting experience with regarding to maintenance, and we're also looking at how we can future-proof our network for the coming years, which we'll talk about later on.
Brilliant. Thanks, Daniel. Richard?
Hi, my name's Richard Spry-Shute. I'm the Customer Director at Liberty Charge. I've been in the industry, been in the industry for about 10 years now, starting off in 2012, putting the infrastructure in for the London Games, and then moving through to work for a small independent installation company and CPO. My history also includes 13 years, although not directly linked to EV. I worked within local authorities, which has stood me in good stead with coming into Liberty Charge, as our main customers are the local authorities, where I was managing the children's services property portfolio for East Sussex. I think in 12 years of being in the industry, having picked up technical skill sets and technical knowledge, it's kind of allowed me to translate the techie into plain English, which is particularly important when working in partnership with not only technical experts, but with our councils, so that we're able to learn and evolve our solutions with them in a way that's meaningful without getting caught up in highly technical language or diagrams that need to be shared.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. And last but not least, Peter, other Peter.
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Robertson. I am the bizarrely titled Performance Support Officer for Northamptonshire County Council. I joined the authority in March 2020, specifically to work on the on-street project, which I've been doing so with Liberty Charge. So we started off with no sort of council-owned charging points on street, and we've now got them located at 21 sites across the north and a further 7 in the west. Each site has 2 charging points, each charging point with 2 connectors, so you're doubling and doubling each time. We're using the Alphen Twin balanced 22 kilowatt per hour charging points, and it's been a fascinating project, just simply because of how swiftly the process has improved in the period we've been working on this. We are now in a position where we're getting feedback on the utilisation of the charging point, which is proven to be encouraging. So yeah, I'm happy to be part of this this group today, here to help where we can. Thank you, Matt.
Brilliant. Thanks, Peter. And yeah, thanks all for introducing yourselves. It's clearly a lot of experience amongst our panelists today, and I think it'd be really good to kind of get into these 2 topics, which are complicated, and I'm sure our audience will appreciate learning from your experiences around this. So just to kick us off, I guess really it'd be good just to kind of get views from each of our panelists on what your top advice would be to a local authority about to embark on a charge point deployment, or moving into a contract around maintenance, and what would your kind of key advice be to ensure that the charge points are going to be well maintained, what to look out for, and maybe some of the experience you've encountered along the way to inform the approach you're now taking. I don't know if anyone would like to go first. I'm going to pick left to right, otherwise go on, Peter. Peter 1, sorry, Peter McDonald. Oh, I don't know if you're on mute, Peter. Sorry, we can't.
Sorry
There you
about
go.
that.
That's okay.
Yeah, if you're not in the highways team itself, then do talk to them and make sure that whatever you're putting together in your tender specification is something that they're happy with. So my director for highways, his thought is always to the end. What happens at the end? What's the end of life agreement? Who's responsible? Who's owning the thing in the meantime? Who is going to take responsibility? And you kind of need to work backwards from that to what happens when there's an emergency. Is that good to start? Because there's a lot of details on each stage between those 2.
That is good to start, and maybe just kind of taking it back to the kind of a fundamental of, first and foremost, to what extent has maintenance been an issue for you all? Has it have the charge points generally worked okay, and the maintenance has kind of taken its care of itself? Have you had to be proactive around it? If there have been maintenance issues, what kind of things have you encountered? Daniel, I'm not sure if you want to tell us a bit about Waltham Forest experience in that regard.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that when you've got 400 charging sockets, you're going to face issues, and we have. So some of our main issues have been motherboards just breaking down over years. With one of our providers, it seems like after 4 years or so of usage, that some of the internal components have needed replacing, which has been okay. They've been proactive in doing so. But as part of that, it's really important that when you are working with a charging point operator to begin with, that you make sure that you've got maintenance in your agreement and that you clearly state who's responsible for what, and also within timescales as well. And that can go from the immediate, something's been hit, there's some live wires exposed, someone needs to go to site to isolate it within, we say 2 hours, and I'd recommend at least 2 hours, to, there's no threat to life, but there's an issue. how quickly are you expecting that field service engineer attend site to just do some logistics tests and see what's happening. So other than motherboard issues, we have experienced a couple of knockdowns. So our first 12 charging points that we installed were on the footway, and around 3 of them have been hit over the past 4 to 5 years. And so moving forward, since summer 2019, we've adopted a policy that all of our fast freestanding charging points will be installed on dedicated build-outs within the carriageway. And they've got like a nail socket so that when there's an issue, you can remove the charging point and replace it. And we've also put 4 bollards which protect the unit. So of all of our fast charging points, we've got 75 which have been installed on a build-out. And touching wood, none of them have been hit. We've had instances where bollards have been hit, but that's the point of the bollard, is there to protect the charging point. So I'd recommend maybe considering build-outs to protect your network. Other minor issues, we have had some vandalism, but that's mainly been in the way of graffiti. It seems to be that graffiti hits feeder pillars, but that's similar to other Virgin cabinets, BT cabinets, etc., that will be on your assets.
Brilliant, thanks, Daniel. It'd be good to get everyone else's experience as well, really, and to what extent that differs, and if so, how. Peter Robertson.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, I'd like to start by echoing, I think, what Peter and Daniel have just said. But it's just picking up on the point Peter made. I found what was really helpful was understanding all of the stakeholders that were going to be involved in implement an EV charging infrastructure. And because I hadn't come from a council background, I didn't know to whom I needed to speak, at what point I needed to. We quickly got on top of that, and it just makes the whole process much easier. Once you've done this stage, you need to inform these people, even right down to when you're doing press releases and communications to local councillors. And on the subject of local councillors, I think early involvement and engagement with the people who represent the area and the public is essential. You need to bring people with you with this. I'm not too sure what's happened with other local authorities, but I suspect it's been the same, where the initial pushback from residents has always been concerns over parking. But if you can help to get the councillors on board, and you've got good communications to put this into context to why we're doing this, it will make your life a lot easier. I think on the subject of maintenance, we're quite early in the process at the moment. We haven't had time for things to actually wear out. But as Daniel said, yeah, we experienced minor graffiti, people just tearing off the connectors, which didn't disable the charging point, but it and people had concerns of whether it was still safe. They are. But other than that, sort of uptime has been 99%. There or thereabouts, and we're noticing our utilisation rates are climbing up as well. And we can monitor these through the Drives back-end system, so we have on-demand reporting for where we've got problems.
Brilliant, thanks, Peter. And Rich, from a charge point operator's perspective, when it comes to maintenance of a charge point network, it'd be great to get your views on how best to go about that, and key things to consider, really, common issues encountered and so on.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the key things, and a common theme that's been sort of mentioned throughout the webinar so far, it's absolutely key to be linked in with the planning and highways teams when you're developing a solution, and once the solution has been implemented, doing that as flexibly as possible. So from a maintenance point of view, as Daniel said, Liberty Charge use the nail socket technology, which allows you to undertake the civils works and safely cap it, so you can deliver an active bay site and a passive bay site, by which I mean you could have 4 bays. 2 bays are powered by a single dual socket Alphen, and the second 2 bays are in place, ready to be made live should demand and public demand be such in the future, without unnecessarily having to dig up and undertake the civils work. So it's dig once, make provision for the future. Although we're hardware agnostic, we've looked at the implementation of quality equipment. So Alphen are a charger that we use a lot across many of our authorities. They're proven, they're reliable. From a supply chain point of view, the spares are readily available. So if we do need to go out and attend sites, we've got a sort of a preferred, if you like, charge point that we use. And we have plenty of equipment and resources able to go out and reactively respond to any issues that there are. Equally, when you're going out and you're responding to those issues, whether it's planned maintenance or reactive maintenance, it's really key that not only do you have the hardware, but you have a good supply chain. So you've got approved installation and electrical engineers that are able to go out, who are approved by the manufacturers of the charge points that you use, and also tend to be HERS accredited, so Highways Electrical Registered Services, because we're working on the streets. Just because they're able to, maintain and look after a charge point, we need to make sure that they're properly trained and able to operate on the street as well. So they're considerations that I'd be sort of flagging whenever you look to design a charging network.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. So real interesting kind of range of issues there. Obviously, some commonalities amongst everyone, and some different things to consider there when looking to roll out your network. I think if we run our first live poll of the session now, it'd be interesting to kind of get some feedback from our audience as to what some of the issues you're encountering are. So if we run that first live poll, you should see the question pop up on the side of your screen, which says, what are the most common maintenance issues you have experienced? And it'd just be interesting to see what comes up there of the different options. So you should have, I can see the votes starting to come in. So charge point malfunction, vandalism, charge point hit or damaged by vehicles, stuck cables, none or other. And we'll just give you a few seconds to answer that. I think you can see the numbers shifting around in real time, but we'll just allow a little bit more time. And then if we want to share those results with everyone now so they can see that. Interestingly, a clear winner, if we want to call it a winner, for charge point malfunction is secure. It's got 62% of the responses there, which I think is surprisingly high, actually. So that's some interesting experience amongst the audience as to what the predominant maintenance issues have been. Be interesting to get the thoughts of our panelists on that, and to what extent you would have voted for those different percentages there. Does charge point malfunction kind of tally with your experiences of some of the more common issues? Obviously, Peter, you were describing some.
Charging points do malfunction. I think the key thing is how quickly they're put right by your charge point operator. And one of the things is that as a local authority, you're the third party. It is the charge point operator that's got the first responsibility to sort them out. So it's when they're out of action for a prolonged period that's the issue. So I'd agree that charge point malfunction is the biggest thing, but we've had relatively low levels over the sort of 10, 12 years that I've been working with charging points. A little bit of vandalism. I've not had any vehicle strikes as far as I know. The stuck cables, I probably don't know. It goes to the charge point operator. Yeah, I mean, charge point malfunction is what most upsets EV drivers and therefore is most likely to be coming back to you as the council. And therefore it's important in letting your contract that you're very clear what the response times and duties are.
Yeah. Any other views from the panelists? What do you make to those responses? I suppose charge point malfunction is a pretty broad category, isn't it? So within that, you've got some potentially quite minor remote reset issues as well as some more fundamental kind of malfunctions. So yeah. Any more?
The other thing is, Matt, as well. It's difficult, isn't it, because I don't know how many different types of charge points we're dealing with there, different types of them. Some may be more prone to others, to vandalism. We've had, the only issue we had when we installed the Alpha twins on street was getting one of them to talk to the sort of back office. That was it, you know, at that point. So that was pretty much part of the installation. Yeah, so it would be interesting. That is.
Yeah, you almost want to split out that charge point malfunction a little bit more, because I suppose it is quite an all-encompassing one, which perhaps explains why it's got so many as results. Interestingly as well, by the way, 20% none. I mean, that's quite encouraging. I think those of us who have been working in the sector for quite a while, and Peter, I recall in one of our earlier discussions, you've got quite a few really quite old legacy units still. I mean,
I'm waiting for the Southern
have improved
so I can
considerably.
replace them. You know?
Sorry, Rich. Richard, you wanted to say something?
No, it's fine. I think you're right. Charge point malfunction is a sort of very catch-all sort of title, but as well as planning and thinking about the hardware that you're using, it's looking at what the customer support service is like with the CPO that you're going to. I recently drove right round in fact, from Scotland back down to the south of England recently in my electric vehicle, doing some work for Liberty Charge, and I would go to every probably fifth charge point I'd go to try and charge up at. There would be some sort of software issue. I won't name names. One provider was absolutely brilliant. You call, they get through, you give them the reference number, they reset. One of them even provided me with a complimentary charge for my troubles. Another one I just could not get hold of. Fortunately, using the sort of charge point location apps, I could see that there were actually another 2 options within a couple of miles of where I was situated. So in that situation, I was lucky. But yeah, I would say that's a key thing, is you've got the physical difficulties that you might have with a charge point, motherboard going, locking motors, failing. But if it's a software issue, it's the responsiveness of the customer care teams that your CPOs provide, I think, are absolutely key.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. Just in terms of, so we've talked about a few of the different issues. Any words of advice around different approaches you've taken? I think when we spoke previously, Dan, you mentioned a mystery shopping approach that you were taking in some instances. Would you mind saying a bit more about that, perhaps?
Yeah. So I think Peter summed it up. First of all, the responsibility of maintenance is a charging point operator. And when there are issues, whether it's a customer getting their cable stuck, they've turned up at a charging point, nothing's working, you're going to call the number that's on either the app or on the charge point, like Richard said, going from Scotland. So we're not always made aware of issues. And because of that, as local authorities, to make sure that our networks are accessible and reliable, we do carry out mystery shopping with all 3 of our charging point operators, from long column charging points through to the faster charging points and the rapids, just to see what it is that the customers are experiencing when they are having issues themselves. And that's been a really valuable exercise, and something that I'd recommend that other local authorities do consider.
Brilliant. Yeah, and similarly, any other advice on approaches that others on the panel would advise our audience of kind of maybe how to hold a charge point operator to account in their maintenance of the network, or make sure you're understanding the performance of the network from the user perspective?
Well, don't forget, Matt, there's the agreement in place which defines the speed of response depending on the severity of the issue, and that's always going to be your starting point within your contract. You hope you don't have to get to the position where you're invoking contract terms and conditions, but it is important that they are well defined, and a respectable charge point operator will lead with these anyway. You shouldn't have to drag it out of them. but yeah, I agree with what Daniel said. It is difficult given that you're not the first port of contact. It's the charge point operator. So sometimes issues which may be resolved quickly, you're just unaware of. Fortunately, we've got some quite vociferous residents in our county who will still happily make you aware of it anyway.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. There's a big part of it is contract management, isn't it, and making sure that what you've agreed is clear, and then that it's been enacted, and holding the charge point operator to account. As you know, inevitably there will still be resident and other pushback that finds its way to officers. However much, as we've discussed, it principally should be the concern of the charge point operator to field those. Just want to let the audience know that you can submit questions at any point. Sorry, I should have mentioned this at the start. So you will see a live chat option on the bar below you. If you have a question on this topic or for any of our panelists in particular, please do feel free to drop a question into the live chat there. I can see we've had a couple come in already, so we'll circle back around to those once we've covered some initial discussion on the topics. So I think we've covered maintenance in the round there, and we've talked about some of the issues you've encountered and some different things to watch out for and approaches that you share as your experience to the audience. I mean, if we come on to the other half of our topic today, then it's around future proofing of the network. And so by future proofing, I guess really what we're thinking about as a topic area is how have you and would you advise that our audience, when rolling out a charge point network, make sure that the network is future proofed. So how will it cope with additional demand from more EVs over time? We're all hoping and expecting that the number of EVs on our roads will continue to grow pretty rapidly. So obviously that shift in demand calls for additional charge point capacity. But then there's also all the changes in terms of the technology, legislation, and so on, evolutions in the vehicle technology. So it'd be great to get some feedback from you all on what some of the key things you would advise are on that topic of future proofing and any lessons you've learned in doing that. Does anyone want to leap in first?
I think some of our first charging points that we delivered with Liberty Charge were installed where we had a active charging point installed on a build out, and then we had a passive build out installed at the same time. So that meant that during the entire installation phase, we could install effectively 2 charging points in one time. So we don't need to dig up the carriageway again. But we're only installing the infrastructure for 1 charging point initially. That just means that residents can see that we've got charging points available and there's going to be room for extra demand when the time is right. So the first charging points we installed with Liberty Charge were in March 2021. And then in March of this year, we analysed the utilisation data, and we were really surprised in a good way with how the charging points were being used. And we decided that it was the right time to consult with residents on our proposals to activate that passive charging point. And I'm glad to say that 8 of them have been activated at the moment, and we're looking at activating the other 2 very soon. And then I think secondly, we mentioned Nell sockets before, but they are fantastic because it does mean that where you installed a feeder pillar, the ducting from the feeder pillar to either a build out or to a curbside charging point, if and when the technology improves, you can just take out the old charging point and put in the new one. So I definitely recommend using Nell or other similar products.
Brilliant, thank you. And so maybe on the passives and on the now sockets, would you mind just describing, just for anyone who's maybe not familiar with those in the audience, what does that look like on the ground for prior to being activated?
So a nail socket is just flush. It's flush with the surface, and you can just lift it up. And I think it's just 1 bolt you have to unscrew to then be able to put in your device. It's not just for charging points. We use them for police beacons at zebra crossings, and I think Transport for London use them at quite a lot of their traffic signals as well. It does mean that when there's incidents, knockdowns with those type of assets, it can be isolated, removed. the area is really safe. There's nothing sticking out. You don't need to excavate to do any repairs, and then you can just put a replacement unit there once that's been ordered.
Brilliant, thank you. Would anyone else like to chip in any kind of considerations or approaches you've taken around future-proofing your network?
Again, I would like to support what Daniel just said. We've adopted exactly the same approach with the Virgin on-street to Liberty Charge points as because there's a lot of work to go through highways, through TRO consultation. So yeah, once we're digging the road up, we've taken the opportunity we've actually installed 2 charging points at each location. Each charging point is served by 2 bays. So there's potential to charge 4 electric vehicles, but only 2 of the bays and 1 charging point is dedicated to electric vehicles. You can park a normal petrol or diesel car in the other bays if you want to. Again, it is about, in the future, as demand increases, we can then bring that into use. And it's a much more efficient way of doing it.
And you're doing that to kind of mitigate against pushback from residents about loss of bays.
Yeah, exactly, Matt. Yeah, because you will the inevitably what you get, and this is what we found with all resident engagements and TRO consultations, as people have said, you're taking away parking bays, but at least it allows us to say we understand, so we are minimising the impact in the short term that we'll be able to have on parking by only dedicating 2 parking bays instead of 4. I think you've got a few questions there, Matt.
I can see the questions trickling in. Yeah, I'll just give everyone a chance to, if Peter or Richard, if there's anything you wanted to kind of flag in terms of, your tips or advice when it comes to future-proofing a network, and then where we will run the final poll and start taking some questions. Anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I guess it shows that each authority might work in different ways. So, I mean, Daniel, I know, is keen on his build-outs, and they're done elsewhere. We're pretty reluctant to use them because it costs more in the first place. It makes resurfacing of the road more complex, and you're much more committed to the location that you've put in. I mean, hopefully you've chosen the right location and it's good, but it's a lot more infrastructure. The beauty of it is that, it's more protected, and we have had some complaints about blocking the pavement. And we may be sounding like Alphen fans. Other makes are available, but they are pretty slim. And very reliable. A few of us from London were very lucky to go on a trip to the Netherlands in 2019, pre-COVID, and Amsterdam in particular was big into Alphens because of their reliability. They're not the cheapest, but given the reliability is so key, that was an important factor. Your practice may vary from what even the 3 of us with the same charge point operator are planning to do. One cautionary tale I've had, on 10% of our Liberty Charge locations, we've only marked up 2 of the 4 bays. But you need to be quite sure that your parking services, your traffic wardens, are aware that it's only the 2 bays where they can issue PCNs. I should say no more than that.
Sounds like some hard-won experience there.
Because all 4 bays are still subject to the traffic management order. They're just not signed and lined, and it can cause some confusion. But we did it on those 5 locations because the opposition to taking 4 bays was very high. But on one of those, about 2 months after the consultation, I had someone email back and say, thank you for being so committed. I'm expecting a baby now, and we're going to be getting an electric car, and I'm so pleased you've put in the 4 bays because it means we will be able to charge our car.
Brilliant.
And P.S. I'm sorry for being an objector.
That's brilliant. That's what it's all about, isn't it? And an interesting observation on the kind of differing design preferences between, you know, two London councils, other side of the river from each other, and I guess it goes to show, you know, that there's a whole variety of things that inform what is the right design for you, depending on the particular characteristics of an area and the relative priorities. So yeah, I mean, it's really good to kind of capture that feedback. Richard, not sure if there's anything you want to add around future proofing before we run our final poll.
To be honest, it's very much agreement with what's already been said. The point around signs and lines, however you're going to manage the bays, be it your TROs or your TMOs, depending on which part of the country you're in, is absolutely key. By making it abundantly apparent, the type of cars that can use the chargers is absolutely key. I think, to be honest with you, everything else has been said.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks for that. I think we've covered some good points there around future proofing and some of the key things we would advise those embarking on the EV charging network journey to consider. If we can run our second poll of the afternoon, then. So you should see this pop up on your screen shortly. So the question we're asking now is, what are your key considerations when future proofing charge points? So it'd be interesting again to kind of get a take from the audience as to what the key things you've been considering are, and then we'll get the views of our panelists on that to try and help with that. At the moment, it's a pretty definitive vote in one direction. I don't know if everyone can see. Oh, there you go. It's starting to vary a bit. So the options we've got here, if you can't see, are scalable charging solutions, i.e. passives or bays that can be activated later, as we've been talking about. Sufficient power provision for future additional charge points. Future-proofed hardware, i.e. charge points you can upgrade with modular power packs and so on. Future-proofing for innovative technology add-ons, so there's no end of add-ons you can consider when it comes to EV charging, ranging from things like parking sensors, air quality sensors, and so on, and other as a bit of a catch-all for anything we're not provided within those options there. So just give you a few more seconds to vote for that if you haven't already. But I think we've got a clear front runner. So yeah, if we can share those results now, you should see that pop up shortly. So again, pretty dominant vote there towards sufficient power provision for future additional charge points. So that probably reflects some of the challenges around ensuring there is power connection and adequate capacity with that power connection to the sites that are being looked at. Next up in terms of votes was future-proofed hardware. So things like ensuring the charge rate can be upgraded over time, and then scalable solutions such as the passive chargers we've talked about. Only 4% voting for kind of technology add-ons, so very much seen as a kind of additional extra rather than a core future-proofing consideration. Any views from our panelists on that? I'd be interested to see if that's as you would have expected to see it, echoes your experience. Main concern being power, upgradability of the power.
I think, to be honest with you, Matt, one of the key things and one of the things we've done with each of the local authorities we have joining us today is we look at the feasibility of putting in the charge points to begin with. So we contact the DNO, we interrogate the line drawings to see what size cables are available, where the nearest subs are, contacting the DNO to ask them about what available supply there is. You might have a dirty great big cable available, but if it's already heavily subscribed and the supply is not available, we have to look at alternatives for bringing in power. And as you'd mentioned, the creation of passive and active sites is based on the assumption that the passive site will become active at some point in the future. Whether or not it does is the in the gift of our clients, the local authorities. But when we design, we make sure that we have the capacity to completely fill the bay designs that we're delivering. So it's absolutely key at the planning stage that you're looking at what the future provision looks like.
Brilliant, thanks, Richard. Yeah, just kind of echoing that point. Yeah, it's so fundamental, isn't it? You know, to make sure that the site is scalable, because if that power supply isn't there, it can become enormously costly to introduce that retrospectively. Yeah, any other views amongst our panelists on that, on the findings of that poll, or shall I move on to some of the questions that we're starting to come in? I'll start moving to the questions because it'd be good to get some time on these. So, the first one's from John Anderson. Will there be a summary document of the webinars covering topics, discussion points sent out to all attendees? I think that yeah, I understand that we are producing a summary pack. So this is it's either the 6th or the 8th in the webinar series we've been running now. So I think with this being the last of this particular series, yeah, we will be preparing a summary document in due course. So I hope to be able to send that out to everyone. The next question we've had come in is from John McVery. Sorry, let me just remove these. Right, I'm sure I'm not the only person. I'm sure I'm not the only person who has responded none because we have yet to install any points. Yes, okay, that's a fair point. So that will have been to our first question when we've asked what maintenance issues have you had. Of course, if you don't have any charge points to begin with, you will hopefully have had no issues. So okay, that's a fair point. We should account for that within our poll. The next question we've had come in is from Alex Robotham, which is saying, getting the CPO to identify a root cause and fix it can be tough. They're most likely just to ID fault and reset. Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone's got any common experience of that, or Richard, if you'd like to comment on that.
I think it's a difficult one, and Alex, you know, as an EV driver, I've had that experience where it's just been a straight reset. There are instances where that is appropriate. Quite often after an over-the-air software update from the charge point hardware manufacturers, pardon me, you'll see that resets are quite often required. That being said, though, if your CPO is not coming back to you with a root cause, you know, it is within your gift to hopefully escalate that within the terms of the contract agreement that you have with them. I would hope that the relationship was such that wasn't necessary and didn't need to happen. But I don't know if that answers your, probably semi-answers your question. For me, if all else fails and good contract management fails, it's an escalation point potentially.
I think it's a really interesting question because, you know, often it is legitimate to try a remote reset, but clearly if there is then a recurring issue, it's not really, you know, to kind of limp along and continually kind of reset it rather than diagnose the real root cause of the problem. If it's resulting in the charge point continually being offline, yeah, you really would hope you'd get into that, diagnosing the actual problem at the heart of it. Not sure if any of our panelists have experienced something similar. Yeah. Okay.
Matt,
so the next...
Matt, I would just say we're answering questions on the live chat. There are also a number of questions in the Ask Your Questions section as well that may be worth looking at.
Yes. Okay. We've got two streams here. Okay, I'll alternate. Okay, somebody's done a thumbs up. Thanks for that. So the next question in the live chat, and then I'll switch, has come from Matthew Blackwell. Future proofing. What about the electrical demand from the grid? Have we considered what the French are doing and installing solar canopies to help with the ever-increasing demand and costs? Any views on? Sorry, go on, Daniel.
Sorry, we're considering installing a rapid charging point hub with the view to maybe install more with their success across the borough. And as part of that, we have looked at installing solar panel canopies because where we're installing a hub with a range of charging points, there's all that space above them that could be used for this. So yes, we are looking at that.
Yeah, my understanding is that French approach is very much on car parks where you're talking quite large numbers of solar panels because you need a considerable solar array, even for a 7 kilowatt. charger, let alone a rapid. So it's good to do it where you can, but in some cases it won't be doing a huge amount of the vehicle charging, and may best be done where there's battery storage to back it up as well.
Absolutely. As you know, if you're not, particularly, well, any renewables, if you're not using the electrons or storing the electrons at the point at which they're made, they're lost. And you're absolutely right, Peter. The solar arrays help to complement and take some of the demand from the grid, but unless you've got a very significant solar array and very few people charging at the same time, you're not going to be able to power purely from a solar canopy. That being said, when you look at them with other microgeneration measures and you look at the solution on a wider scale, they're absolutely worth considering where appropriate.
Yeah, where there's the opportunity, then
absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay. Next question we've had come in on the Ask a Question section is from Alex Robotham. Are financial penalties for charge point operators common in contracts incurred when charge point operators are failing to achieve SLA metrics? So are financial penalties for CPOs common in contracts incurred when CPO are failing to achieve their SLA metrics?
Not as far as I know, but I think it will increasingly need to come in. I guess in London, we're kind of lucky that there's sufficient numbers of different charge point operators around that we know they've got to be on the ball. I don't know if anybody else has any other thoughts.
Yes, if it's not a bridge you've had to cross yet, and the charge point operator is performing and sufficiently responsive, I guess it's not having had to have recourse to do that yet. Yeah.
I mean, don't forget as well, Matt. But when charge points are down, the charge point operator is not generating any income either.
Yeah.
So we're both in this together.
And it's more than that; it's their reputation, which is everything at the moment.
Next question we've had is from Ange Dior Thomas, who has said, I'm aware that the session does not address telematics, but as a potential future-proofing measure, I thought it worthwhile to ask. So yeah, the role of telematics in EV charging. I'm not sure if anyone's got any views on that. I'm not sure whether that's with regards to the charge points or vehicles being fitted with telematics to communicate with the charge points. But yeah, I'm not sure if anyone's got a view on that.
We're currently reviewing our EV strategy. So we've got a document that takes us up to 2025, and we are considering if we need to review that for another 5 years to cover the whole decade. And as part of that, we have talked about inductive charging and telematics, but we haven't made much more progress because I think, like Matt was saying, until the vehicles have the capability and the devices, and we're actually seeing residents in our local authority area with those vehicles, it's difficult for us to take this much forward.
Yeah, so it's a case of waiting for the market to evolve a little bit in that sense for it to become more of a mainstream proposition. Yeah. Okay. Next question or kind of comment was from Peter Milliken, who said, best way to move forward, we are looking at self-management. We would look at outsourcing, but concern of contract lengths as a rural area. So that's quite an interesting one. So I guess that's kind of looking at some of the considerations we talked about today around maintenance and future proofing and so on, and potentially drawing a conclusion that self-management would be a better approach to take due to concerns over contract length. I'm not sure what, it'd be interesting to get the views of yourselves as councillors, really, who, not having gone down that route, maybe, why have you not chosen to go that way, and what would your advice be around that? So
if I can offer our opinion on it, I mean, it's resources, Matt, to be honest with you, as well, and also it's not where we have our expertise. I understand that there is potentially funding available to set up dedicated teams to run this, but as your EV network grows, you're going to have an increasing number of people involved in supporting delivering maintenance for your sort of cell phone charging point. So yeah, we've not gone down that route. I think just because it gives us a degree of confidence in the short term, and we're quite new into this. To make sure that the maintenance is carried out properly and regularly.
Yeah. Any other views on that? I think that's there's a lot to do, isn't there, to manage a network of charge points, and I guess I would always slightly caution against trying to necessarily kind of take on the role of a charge point operator. There are merits to different approaches depending on the particular circumstances, but yeah, I'm not sure if anyone else has got a kind of view on that. Has contract length been a concern for you in part of the equation, or?
Yeah, I mean, as Peter was indicating as well, we're local authorities and not commercial chargepoint operators, and as has come up in the discussion so far, it is the day-to-day operating of the things and the customer service that is really key. They are more than just a socket. So I'd be wary of it. If you have the capacity and the skills, then yeah, there's some savings, but the technology and the industry is moving so fast that keeping up with it is going to be difficult. Contract lengths, I mean, ultimately it is down to you as the council in question. And essentially, the longer the contract, the better the deal you're going to get on an annual basis. But don't be stretched too far. There's a ground in the middle. And if I might refer to one of the other questions that is coming up, a lot of our discussion has been about on-street. Most of the same stuff does apply in car parks. You just don't have some of the complexities about responsibility for what's on the road, but having protection or build outs might apply in the same way depending on the car park. You might be able to do wall mounted ones, in which case your life is simpler, but the power supply, the maintenance, the servicing, everything else is pretty much the same.
Question from Brian. Sorry, it's jumping around here. Right, so no. Question from Ildefonso Cases. Directed at yourself, Daniel. Could you please share a picture or any sketch of this device to install the chargers and being able to remove them easily? So I think that's referring to a now socket. So we'd certainly be happy to kind of follow up offline after the call, Ildefonso, to show you an example of a now socket, but also a passive charger deployed specifically. Yeah. Brian,
if you Google NAL socket, so it's NAL socket, then you'll be able to see one.
Yeah. So Brian Jeans had asked, what's the life expectancy of chargers? We've just installed a twin 22 kilowatt charger, and the locals are asking what we're expecting.
I have some that are still going strong after 10 years.
I'd echo that as well. Depending on the make of the charger, and Alphen is a very reliable brand. In a previous role, I've got Alphens that not quite up to your level yet, Peter, but eight years and still going strong. I think the most we had to replace on them was other Peter you'd mentioned, where people sometimes have a go at the socket covers and a replacement LED display. So these are all readily available parts that literally swap in, swap out.
Brilliant, thank you. Jackie Williams has asked whether anyone on the panel works with the NHS at all. So obviously not directly, but whether any of you have got experience of working with partners in the NHS, perhaps, to deploy chargers. Richard, go on.
Jackie, yeah, I did. I worked with the blood and transplant service in a previous role. The beauty of that being, and without getting into a blue light conversation, where you've got fleets and you're looking at which parts of your fleets are most appropriate potentially to electrify. Blood and transplant was a really great example of that, because you had known forecastable routes that were taken, the vehicles were known, the stop times were known, and we were able to put in charging infrastructure to support that. As far as Liberty Charge goes, we'd be happy to have a conversation with you, but that's something I'd have to refer to our business development team, but more than happy to be in contact with you after the webinar if you would like.
Brilliant, thank you. Omar Yassin has asked, what data points are used to define a good charger location, and does utilisation determine a service? Go on, Peter. You pulled a face. I assume.
No. Yeah, I mean, most charge point operators will come to you and have their own methodology for determining that, based on maybe the socioeconomic profile of the location, the DVSA data on EV ownership, and other data on propensity for EV ownership. We've very much worked around where the requests are, and most of the government grants for residential charging is based on where the requests are. Equally, having with sort of 300 or so charging points in place, I can assure you that some of the time we get it absolutely right, and some of the time the places that all the data said it was going to be a brilliant location doesn't do well. Other places where I had a lot of difficulties, and in fact, the only correlation I've seen so far is that where there's more objections to my traffic management order, they've ended up being the best used. But don't take that in writing. So, yeah, I mean, challenge your charge point operator as to what data they're going to be using, but also get out there and ask your residents what they want. Taxi drivers and other high mileage users are the ones who are going to be using the charging point the most.
Was going to be completely my observation that there is a degree of science to it, to the extent that you can analyze an area and come up with what you would expect to be high demand areas. But as you point out, Peter, given that the EV uptake is still comparatively low as a percentage of overall vehicles, the impact of one high user case in an area can massively affect the utilization or not. And so, yeah, there's a lot of kind of very locally specific noise that is hard to entirely kind of model. There's that obviously.
We are in early days yet, you know.
Yeah. I think we've got time for one more question, and then we'll wrap up. What we got here? Well, it's a long one. So Michael Talbot has asked. All right, sorry, I can't get to the bottom of that. Alex Roybotham has asked, does Liberty Charge operate their own back office or subcontract? This can be a major influencer on charger reliability. Richard, would you mind taking that to close us out?
Not at all. So we use the Drives platform. We found it to be very reliable. It gives us the data we need, particularly the heartbeat messages that you get. All charge points, as I'm sure people know, are SIM or internet enabled, so that they can communicate with the back offices. Ours gives us a real time view of utilization, charging sessions, faults, which allow us to proactively go out and deal with the faults as they occur. And as was mentioned earlier on, you know, sometimes councils don't get a heads up that there's an issue, and that is due in part to a good back office system that flags there's an issue, and we've actually gone out and dealt with it before it affects any customers to the point at which they want to flag that with the local authority. So to answer your question, we operate using Drives, and we're not subcontracting. We're using the software system, and we're operating it ourselves.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. And on that note, we just hit 3 o'clock, so I'd just like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. Really good conversation around what can be the kind of challenging topic of maintenance and future proofing. And I think having the benefit of people who have a lot of experience of deploying a large number of charge points for some time now, and really kind of seeing some of the things you might encounter that has hopefully been really useful to our audience. Some great questions as well, and hopefully some really helpful answers for everyone there. Just to kind of recap the main takeaways I think from that are around maintenance. There was a real point around making sure that there's a clear and robust and well understood SLA in place. That you check that you ultimately put it on the charge point operator to make sure that they are responsive and maintaining the charge points well. As has been said, they should be well incentivized to do that anyway. They need those charge points to be working reputationally and to make their money on those. Some approaches to checking that those charge points are well maintained. We had some talk around mystery shopping, really to just kind of get that first-hand experience of using the charge points, and the user experience makes it far more relatable when comments do come back to you. And then we talked about future proofing and the real value that all of our panelists saw in approaches such as passive chargers and now sockets to allow you to future proof additional charges to be added at minimal disruption at a later date, and some different approaches to managing communicating within the council and the various different departments, getting stakeholders on board, and keeping local residents and other stakeholders on side throughout the planning and consultation process. So yeah, thank you all very much for joining today. I hope that's been useful for you all. This video will appear online and accessible after the event if you've missed any of it. And yeah, just like to conclude by thanking our panelists again, and so that if anyone would like to get in touch for a further, more detailed one-on-one conversation with any of the Liberty Charge team, we'll run a final poll now. And if you would be interested in a further discussion, please let us know. But yeah, otherwise, I hope you all have a good afternoon.